one. Live from New York, the Spirit Matters, your daily Bhakti Center podcast. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. My name's Dal Gurunga. I'm here with Kishore Chandra. Our tri-host Achyuta Gopi is not with us this morning, but we're so glad that you're here, tuning in from wherever you are, along with our live virtual studio audience who's with us. How you doing, Kishore?
I'm doing great. I feel like my heart is really better, like much better than it was, but my body is just like being in a body sometimes is so rough. It's like especially when you're like above 30, if you have one wrong night of sleep, it's over. It's just over.
Being in a body is rough, especially when you're over 30. Write that down, Kimberly. Yeah, but the
How
heart's
are
in a
you?
good space. Yeah. We had a beautiful Diwali festival at the Bhakti Center last night.
Yes.
Yesterday was Diwali. Today's Govardhan Puja. We had a beautiful, beautiful festival. Hundreds of people were walking through the doors. Beautiful kirtan, beautiful atmosphere, really sweet. CBS News, Fox News were both there to cover the story. There was beautiful news links about it and people reporting and celebrating. It was really sweet.
Yeah, that last kirtan was fire that Doyal led. I was like, whoa. We were all kind of just like huddled over Doyal, just like jumping around. I told the Chita Gopi afterwards, I was like, I didn't know we go this hard for Diwali. Like, I didn't know this was a thing. And she was like, yeah, we go hard for everything. I was like,
We
great.
we go hard for everything. That's our Bhakti Center slogan. Your spiritual home, and we go hard for everything.
Oh, Krishna.
So it was sweet. It was sweet, and now we're here, and now we are here reading the Bhagavad Gita. I had a dream with you last night, Kishore.
Oh,
Well, there was all kinds of things going on. It was one of those I had a dream that we needed to build turn the basement of the Bhakti Center into a dodgeball court. That was an instruction from Radhanath Swami. I don't know where that came from, but there was a number of things going on in the dream. And one of them, we were walking along a beach or something, and there was a group of Chinese people that were speaking to us in Chinese, and they didn't know that you spoke Chinese. And then there was like a face off between you and them because like they weren't believing that you spoke Chinese, and then when they realized that you spoke Chinese, they left. And so there was this whole thing going on between you and your Chinese speaking abilities.
wow. That's amazing. That sounds like that
That was
sounds
you.
like a
That
dream.
was you in my dream. Sorry if you were thinking of something more profound.
No, no, no. That was perfect. I
I said I had a dream, and I was like, Krishna perked up, and then when I told him the dream, he was like, "Oh,
I like the dodgeball
that
court
was better.
idea in the basement. I don't know
That
how
was
we'll fit it.
yeah. The basement was a lot bigger in the dream." All right, so we're reading the Bhagavad Gita. We're in
Yeah.
the second chapter. It's a big chapter, so we've been spending a lot of time on it. For those new or unfamiliar to the Bhagavad Gita, the very, very beginning of the Gita talks about the treatise of the soul, the nature of the eternal identity of the living being. And it's very profound because the way that truth is described is that which is eternal.
Hmm.
And so it's not so much about even the sense of good and bad and right and wrong, but like what's real and what's not real. And we have so many identities, and it's not coming at you saying that that's bad, that's wrong, but like this is what's real, that which is eternal. And all of the identities you have that are temporary, they're not the real you. And it's just this very clear distinction and delineation. And Krishna's almost like, do what you want with that information. But I'm just letting you know that if you cling to the temporary identities that aren't real, there's going to be pain associated with it. There's going to be disappointment that comes along with it. There's going to be sorrow. There's going to be frustration. There's going to be confusion and bewilderment. And so we start to peel away these temporary identities that I'm even a man or a woman, or I'm a mother or a father or a brother, or I'm rich or I'm poor, or I'm smart or I'm stupid, or I'm quote unquote pretty or not pretty or whatever it may be. I'm influential. All of these temporary identities, and getting to the real essence of, first and foremost, cutting through all of it, understanding that you're a spirit soul. And then with that understanding of being a spirit soul, bringing that out into the world and letting that guide the way that you live. And then Arjuna's first question is, that sounds great, but like, is there anybody that's like that? And what are the qualities of somebody who exhibits such spiritual consciousness? And the question that we looked at yesterday, and we have been looking at leading into this next section, is Arjuna asking this question of like, what are the qualities of somebody? We read a beautiful purport from Srila Prabhupada that described how there are qualities of spiritually advanced people, just like there are qualities of people in various material um, uh, ways of life. And so we looked at the importance of looking beyond the externals of somebody, of a spiritually advanced person. A spiritually advanced person doesn't just dress a certain way and do their hair a certain way and, you know, speak with a certain accent or is a certain age, but it's something much deeper in the way and how they move through the world, and specifically how they speak. The words that come out of their mouth, the way they treat other people, their character, their level of integrity. And sometimes it takes time, but it's worth identifying. Um, and so for us to be able to look at spirituality from a level of maturity and be able to gauge our own and other people's spiritual level advancement through character and integrity, and how we respond to the world. So that's the section we're in right now. We're about to start to get Krishna's answers into like these qualities and characteristics. They do a good job, you sure? Or was that too much?
No, that was perfect. That was a great recap.
Okay, great. Thanks. Sometimes I just launch into things and I'm like, should I keep going? Should I stop? Or is Kishore flagging me down?
No, it was good. It was good.
Kimberly said that was solid. I think that's what the kids mean when they say good job.
Yeah, that was solid. So we are reading chapter 2, verse 55. This is Krishna's beginning to answer these questions. And specifically in this verse, he's giving kind of a general answer of what the symptoms are of this person who is fixed in transcendence or fixed in consciousness of God, of Krishna. So he's not getting into the like specific, how do they speak, how do they sit, how do they walk yet. This one is more of a general answer. So it says, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O Partha, another name for Arjuna, when a person gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which, which arise from mental concoction, and when their mind, thus purified, finds satisfaction in the self alone, then they are said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. And the purport's nice and short and nice and really good, so I'll read it as well. It says, Srila Prabhupada says, the Bhagavatam affirms that any person who is fully in Krishna consciousness or a devotional service of the Lord has all the good qualities of the great sages, whereas a person who is not so transcendentally situated has no good qualifications, because he is sure to be taking refuge in his own mental concoctions. Consequently, it is rightly said herein that one has to give up all kinds of sense desire manufactured by mental concoction. Artificially, such sense desires cannot be stopped. But if one is engaged in Krishna consciousness, then automatically sense desires subside without extraneous efforts. Therefore, one has to engage himself in Krishna consciousness without hesitation, for this devotional service will instantly help one onto the platform of transcendental consciousness. The highly developed soul always remains satisfied in himself by realizing himself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Lord. Such a transcendentally situated person has no sense desires resulting from petty materialism. Rather, he remains always happy in his natural position of eternally serving the Supreme Lord. I'll just say one short thing because I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, Doyal. But I really like this verse because I feel like chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita in many ways is kind of like like a call on Arjuna and on all of us to, Srila Prabhupada uses this language a lot, to become rightly situated, right? To understand like who I am in this world and how, and my relationship to God and divinity, and my relationship to the physical world, and my relationship to this body even, and to this mind. And so it's like we're being reminded here on a much higher level, because it's almost like a warning that Srila Prabhupada is giving. It's like, hey, what are you taking shelter of? Are you taking shelter of this mind and the mental concoctions, which, I mean, he says it really clearly in the purport. It's gonna disqualify you. Like, I don't know much about sports, but I know like you can get disqualified in sports and then you're out of the game or something like
Red
that.
flagged,
Red flagged. So it's
red
like
carded, red card.
red. I don't know.
Red,
I have no
you're
idea.
asking the wrong person.
But Srila
Disqualified,
Prabhupada
ejected.
ejected, disqualified. Srila Prabhupada is saying like, if you're taking shelter of these mental concoctions that you're making up in your mind, it's like you're going to become disqualified, you know? And so he's saying rather we should be, because I really like the way he says it. It's like trying to there's this one sentence. But if one is engaged in Krishna consciousness, then automatically sense desires subside without extraneous efforts. Because I really like this sentence, because trying to do it without like a really, good spiritual practice, without Krishna consciousness, trying to control this mind or control the senses, I mean, it's really hard. Like, it's already very hard, but imagine doing that without kind of like this relationship or this deeper meaning, this deeper purpose of Krishna. And so Srila Prabhupada is saying like, through this devotional service, then that kind of stuff will just subside. And it's a really beautiful thought to have, that like it's dovetailed through our service to Krishna.
Yeah. I was thinking of that book, The Four Agreements. You ever read The Four Agreements? And the idea of agreements and the whole premise, there are four agreements, but the preface of the book is this idea that we've made all kinds of agreements that we just think are fact, that we just think are the way things are. But if we retrace our step and we go back and be like, oh, actually, I entered into an agreement with the world, with my mind, with my family, about a premise that is not absolute reality, but is completely subjective and relative. And I just either consciously or unconsciously, intentionally or unintentionally, knowingly or unknowingly, just accepted that this is the way something is. And I love this phrase that Prabhupada mentioned in the verse itself, and comes up multiple times in the purport, of this idea of mental concoctions. And specifically, Prabhupada mentions this idea of varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction. And I just want to like unpack this word desire for sense gratification, because it's a very sort of it's a term that gets used a lot in some circles, but may not have the meaning may not be illuminated to someone who's never heard the term before. Like in Vedic psychology and epistemology, what does the word epistemology mean? Can I just throw that word? Can I throw that word out there and assume that nobody knows what it means?
Epistemology means like the study of knowledge itself. So it could work in this.
Epistemology, or like the study of ontology. What about ontology?
Ontology is the study of like the causes of like the metaphysical causes of something.
Metaphysical causes. Ontology. Let me just look that up. The branch of it dealing with the nature of being, set of concept or domain that shows the properties and the relationships between them. Yeah. So ontology, Vedic ontology and psychology, and like what is the world made of? You know, and there's this idea of the senses. We have, the five senses of taste, touch, seeing, smelling, and hearing, right? We have five senses. And then there are sense objects, the things that those senses connect with, and the when a sense connects with a sense object, when my sense of hearing connects with the sound, when my sense of seeing connects with the sight, when my sense of touching connects with the touch, when those senses, which are grouped around the mind is sometimes referred to as the sixth sense, um, connect with the sense object, that's called sense gratification. Like it's okay. There's some experience taking place, and what Vedic psychology is talking about, that those coming together of the senses and sense objects are inherently in some ways neutral. The mind is what tells us something is good or bad, something is pleasurable or unpleasurable. The mind is what tells us which is pleasurable or unpleasurable. And so when it says that there's a desire for sense gratification, I want to touch something, I want to see something, I want to hear something, I want to experience something, there's a belief through the mind that that type of connection of senses with sense objects will bring me a certain level of happiness. That is a mental concoction. That's an agreement that we've entered into. And what the Bhagavad Gita is doing in this section and throughout the rest of the book, it's going to start challenging the agreements that we've made with our mind, with society, with our families, with our own selves. Like, wait a minute. Who said that was the truth? Who said that that was the level of happiness? Who said that that is the solution to my problems? Like, where did that come from? And why am I chasing those carrots? And so I think this idea, and Prabhupada mentioned taking refuge in my own mental concoctions. It's like, it's so easiest of like, where do I go to soothe myself? I somehow have this subconscious agreement that it's in like food, binge watching shows, finding a new relationship. We were talking yesterday about the idea of like hitting the eject button, moving cities, quitting jobs, going somewhere else, finding a new relationship, sex, like whatever it may be. We have to reprogram and rewire the idea of what it is to find me shelter, what it is to find me comfort, where it is my happiness is going to lie. And this idea of like questioning what actually brings happiness. And it's all based on some level of mental concoction. It's an agreement that my mind has, that I've allowed my mind to tell me. And the intelligence sits above the mind. The intelligence says, even though that feels good right now, it's not good for you. That midnight piece of cheesecake, staying up to binge watch that show, going over to his or her house to spend the night. It feels like a good idea right now because the sense gratification is saying, ooh, this feels so good. But the intelligence is like, no, that's not a good idea. And the intelligence is, even if it doesn't feel good right now, clicking the off button, turning your phone off, saying no to that invitation, staying home, getting to bed early, feels like, oh, this is lame or dumb. It's like, no, this is actually what's good for you. And Krishna is saying that even above the intelligence is the spiritual intuition of the soul of being connected to Krishna on a spiritual level. That higher sense of refuge is ultimately going to pull us out of the muck of the agreements of our mind and bring us to this level of the soul, which is what we're talking about, which is real. Because your mind is living in the service of your false temporary identities. Your mind is living in the service of your false temporary identities. And Krishna's trying to pull us out of that and say, no, 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 come to a higher level and start to live in service of your supreme eternal identity. And it's not going to feel cool. It's not going to feel immediately gratifying. It's not going to go along with the agreements of the news or society or social media. It's not going to all of a sudden make you famous or rich or materially comfortable right away or ever. But it's in your best interest. Therefore, Prabhupada says in the purport, one has to engage themselves in Krishna consciousness without hesitation. for their devotional service will instantly help one to the platform of transcendental consciousness. And the highly developed soul always remains satisfied in themselves by realizing themselves as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Lord, not the eternal servitor of my material identities or my senses.
Mm, I feel like I just
Right.
heard like a sermon in a good way, in a good way. Like it was
And
really
one has to deny the temporary agreements of the mind and the senses, and one has to elevate themselves to the higher spiritual agreements of the soul.
exactly, exactly. That's what it felt like, but in the best way. Because I think people in the chat were also really appreciating the way you broke it down, and explained sense gratification, and kind of gave a little bit of a map of like where things sit, the mind sitting above the senses, the intelligence sitting above that, and the soul in our relationship with Krishna even sitting above that. And I think it's really, really fascinating too, because it's, we're talking about sense gratification, and I really love that you said that in some ways it's kind of neutral. It's just the connection of the senses with the sense objects that that's happening, but really it's the mind and the mental concoctions and these subconscious agreements that we make, that we've been making in this life and in many lives before this, with society, with family, with this, with that, etc., of like what is good or what feels good or what isn't good. I really love, it really behooves us, we haven't come back to our word in a while, it really behooves us to kind of like look at the things that we're doing in our life subconsciously, and to kind of ask that question, because I think it's so powerful. It's like, wait a minute, like who told me that this is like the right thing to do, or who told me that this is a good thing to do, whether it's binge watching the Netflix, or whether it's food, or whether it's this or whether it's that. It's like, where along the line of my life did I agree to this? Like,
Yeah.
what did I sign that told me, that wired my mind in a way that's like, this equals soothing, this equals good, this equals my senses are gratified. Because we've talked about this before, and Arjuna is also talking about it. I brought this up a few days ago. Just, I always like to come back to this reminder that at the beginning of this chapter 2, Arjuna is telling Krishna, like, I don't know what's good for me anymore. I no longer know what is good for me anymore. And I need you. I'm surrendering to you as a disciple. And I need you to tell me what is the ultimate good, right? This Shreyas. What is the ultimate good for me? Because I just don't know anymore, right? And in Vedic understanding, we've gone into this before, but like the prayas versus shreyas, what is good for me right now in this moment, what I think is good for me right now in this moment, might not necessarily be what is good for me in the long run, right? And so Arjuna realizes that, and he's like, Krishna, please tell me like what is good for me ultimately. So that pint of ice cream, or that binge watching, or that going to whoever's house, or going to that party that maybe you're not supposed to go to, whatever it is for you, it's like, it might seem cool in the moment. And I love how you put it, Dayal, because it's like, yeah, like connecting with our eternal, soul's mission of being servants of higher power. It's like, it might not feel cool in the moment,
It's not always sexy.
Yeah, it's not always sexy. It's definitely going to feel cooler to like, get all did up and go to the party and do whatever it is, but it might not ultimately be good for us. And that, as spiritualists, that's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to that point, that place where it's like, you know what, you brought this term up yesterday, Doyal, of the materially impoverished and exhausted. Like, I'm just done with all of this nonsense of just filling up my sense gratification cup, and then it getting depleted, and then me chasing after the bigger thing. Because the thing with the senses too, on a both physical and subtle level, like, they're very delicate, like, just think about, if anyone lives in a big city, just think about how sound affects you. It's like, when you go out of the big city, and it's almost like scary, you're like, it's silent, like, you're so not used to it, and then you get back to the big city, and it's like horns blaring and ambulances blaring, and you're just like, oh, this feels okay, but then it gets too loud. It's like the senses are quite delicate. But that being said, we have a tendency, or they can become kind of dulled, right? It's like someone who doesn't live in the city, who lives kind of in the rural areas, they come into the city for the first time, they're just like, oh my God, what is this? This is insanity, you know? Or Pasha and Lane, they were in India with us. Nachi was there with us too. It's like you go to India and it's like you don't know what's going to hit you, because it's kind of like sense overkill, right? The colors and the smells and the noises and the sounds, and it's like, okay, these senses are subtle things, but there's a possibility of them becoming kind of used to things, or dulled after a while. So it's like, what I'm trying to say is that, like, you meet that sense desire with something, whatever it is for you, the pint of ice cream or going out or whatever. And then it feels good for a while, for a month or whatever. And after a while, you're like, you know what? I think I need 2 pints of ice cream, because that 1 pint is just not hitting the same way that it used to. You know, I need two. And then you do the two, and then it just becomes like that, where you take shelter of the mental concoctions telling you this is the right thing, this is good. You know what? That 2 hours of binge watching, it's not doing anything for me anymore. Like, I don't feel anything. I need a new show. I need a new thing. I need a bigger, crazier, more intense, more lurid show to kind of like engage me in this and etc. And that's the way the senses work, you know? And so I think the deeper, and I'll end here because I'm ranting, but the deeper you kind of dig yourself into the hole of sense gratification, and needing like more, it's you're getting farther and farther away, as you delineated it, Doyal, from this higher consciousness that's like up here, you know? So it's kind of like this upward trajectory that we're trying to go on. We're trying to, like, you know, think of like the lotus blooming from the mud. It's like we're trying to like go upward. We're trying to see the light. We're trying to go towards higher power. But the more and more that we take shelter of that mental concoction and of the senses, it's going to be a rough time. I see the chat is blowing up too.
People are blowing up. Also, I think I was talking about this question of like, I don't know what's good for me anymore, and it's such a great question, and it's a question that Arjuna asked, and so and just the answer that Krishna gave is that it wasn't this is what's good for you. It's like you have to know who you are, because talking about the idea of sense gratification of my senses coming in contact with objects of the senses as being something neutral. It's like, you hear a story of somebody winning the lottery. It doesn't do anything for you. Big whoop, you know, or somebody else, having a good time that I don't know, big whoop. But all of a sudden, or somebody else dying or having an intense, miserable experience of illness or disease or natural tragedy. It's like, it doesn't affect us the way as if when happens to somebody close to us, because that's all of a sudden my brother, my son, my friend. Or when it happens to me, somebody else eating a piece of midnight cheesecake doesn't do it for me. But for me, when my tongue touches a piece of cheesecake, vegan or non-vegan cheesecake, depending on your tastes, um, then all of a sudden I feel like that felt good. And what Krishna's saying is like, that tongue, that ear, none of that's you anyways. It's just like two pieces of matter just colliding into each other. Why is that such a big deal to you? Because that's not you either. That's not your ear. That's not your tongue. That's not your eye. That's not your nose. That's not your mind. None of it is you. It's just a dead operating system that you're inhabiting for a period of time, like a crab inside a shell. And so it's like, don't get all big whoop-de-doop-de about, your senses coming in contact with sense objects, because none of it's you anyways. We have this agreement that this is me. We've signed the agreement that this is me. And what happens to this body affects my level of happiness. And so, but no, it's an operating system. It's a tool for which we can operate and do wonderful things in the world. So yes, we should maintain it. We should honor it. We should keep it sacred. We should listen to it when it's giving us important information about what's needed to operate in the best way. But we shouldn't mistake it as us, and that the caring of this machine is the end goal and all in all, because it's not really us. It's just a loaned piece of equipment that we're inhabiting for a period of time. And so don't think that it's you, and don't base your happiness based off of taking care of this machine. And so I think that the idea of understanding who we are becomes so pertinent and important. And therefore, Krishna is talking about here the idea that when you understand them, that's why the last sentence of this purport we could end here is such a transcendentally situated person has no sense desires resulting from, and I love this word, petty materialism. Petty materialism. Rather, they remain happy in their natural position of eternally serving the Supreme Person because they recognize that actually that's who I really am. So we've chat's been blowing up. We've been ranting and a raving. We want to hear from Kimberly. What are we taking away here? What are some of the nuggets that came up during these rants, and then we'll have some closing words.
Reconsider the agreements we have made, both subconscious and consciously. Krishna is trying to pull us out of taking shelter of the false concoctions and temporary identities of our mind so we can live in service to our supreme eternal identity.
Great one. Closing words, Kishore?
I think this is I'm really happy that we spent a whole episode on this verse because it's kind of like a precursor to the verses that are coming in terms of, like you said, Doyal, Krishna didn't tell Arjuna like this is good and this is bad. It was more of understanding who you really are. And that's what I'm walking away with, because it's kind of like the continuous message of the Gita, like understand who you really are. And when you really embody that, then all these other things are just going to become extraneous. They're not going to become as important as your mind is making them out to be. When I'm really situated in my heart, in my soul, in who I am and my relationship with higher power, then all this other stuff is just going to be like, yeah, it's happening, it's out there, whatever. But it's not going to arrest me and arrest my senses as much as it does. So I'm walking away with that, just remembering.
Thank you. I'm walking away with just the sense of why do I put so much energy and emphasis at certain places? Like, who told me to get so obsessed about that? And just to pause and think about, like, what is the premise that this obsession is based off of? That, like, this person needs to feel a certain way about me because why? I need this level of validation in the world because why? And just really question the premise that my obsessions are based off of, because I could save myself a lot of energy and frustration. And so rather than try to squeeze something out of something. All right, guys, love you so much. Thank you for all the beautiful chats that's going on here, our Zoom chat, and beautiful conversations from Bal Devi, from Martha, from Lane, from Dana Kay, and everybody else. So glad that you guys are all here. Really, 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 really appreciate you. Wherever you're tuning in from, thank you so much. Please be in touch with us. You can always write to us at info@bhakticenter.org. We should get a Spirit Matters email, shouldn't we? Let's get that, Kishore. Spirit Matters at bhakticenter.org. We're going to get that this week, and we want to get all the fan mail so we know who you are and where you're tuning in from. We want to get your questions and your experiences and your stories, all your Spirit Matter stories, because we want to hear from you. We want to increase and connect more with this family. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Thanks for being here. We love you, and we will see you all again very soon. Take care, and bye-bye.